Hello, I'm Robert Veel from Limelight Arts Travel, and in this online talk, I'm going to be talking about the shipping industry as it was practiced in Venice and some of the reasons why Venice came to dominate trade in the Mediterranean for so many centuries. This talk will be particularly useful if you're exploring some of the shipbuilding areas around Venice, particularly the very large industrial complex of the Arsenale, which today you can visit if you're coming along to the Biennale of Art or of Architecture, or indeed to the Venice Boat Show. And in the second part of the talk, I'll talk about the Arsenale and how it worked in some detail. But to start off with, I want to emphasize the connection that Venice has on so many levels with the sea and with the shipping industry, which gave it its dominance. And this is expressed not just in the timbers and canvases of ships themselves, but on all sorts of levels. And this includes a kind of a metaphorical or spiritual level. And there are rituals that are still practiced in Venice today, which reflect that very deep connection with the sea. Indeed, any Venetian who is brought up on the lagoon will be a skilled boat person, will be able to navigate boats of sometimes surprisingly large sizes through the narrow canals around corners, seemingly never having an accident. It's quite remarkable. So the sort of spiritual connection of the sea, as I said, with rituals, but also in artworks such as this painting, which shows the winged lion of St. Mark, with 2 feet on land, 2 feet in the water, with the ships of the Venetian fleet leaving the port on the right, and the obvious prestige and wealth of Venice represented by the Doge's palace and the bell tower of St. Mark's on the left. This painting, painted in 1516, I discuss in detail in the lecture that's on the cult of the Saint of St. Mark in Venice. A couple of centuries later, another wonderful Baroque painting by Giambattista Tiepolo, which is in the ducal palace. This time it's not St. Mark the Christian, but it's Neptune, the ancient pagan god of the sea. Venice represented as the beautiful woman with the gold hair, of course, resting her orb on the lion's head, while Neptune showers Venice with riches, including, if you can see there, some coral mixed in with the coins and other gold and things that comes from Venice's trade with the sea. So Venice is very explicit in understanding and representing its connection with the sea, and understanding that the whole of society depends on this connection with the sea. Another work which I discuss in the talk about St. Mark is this one, which shows a fisherman, the lowest and one of the people involved in the shipping industry, connecting with the Doge and the Doge's council as he presents a ring which had been given to him in a storm on the lagoon in the year 1341. And in the legend, St. Mark appears to the fisherman and tells him to visit the Doge, who will fill his cap with gold. So again, that connection this time existing on a spiritual but also a social level. Number of paintings, of course, artworks through which Venice became famous visually to Europeans include very often the representation of these semi-sacred processions. So here's a very famous painting, which is in the Royal Collection in England from 1734 by Canaletto, the great export artist who was producing his urban landscapes for the aristocrats who visited Venice on the Grand Tour. And this shows very clearly on the right the Doge's ceremonial barge, the Bucintoro, sailing out as it does on the Feast of the Ascension, or the Festa dell'Ascenza, as the Venetians called it, out to the entrance to the lagoon, where the Doge throws a wooden ring into the sea, renewing his vow with the sea in that particular way. Or a similar work by Francesco Guardi, showing the background of the bacino with the same vessel, this ornate barge of state, the Bucintoro. Sadly, by the way, that Bucintoro, one of the grandest of all Venice's ships, no longer exists. It was burnt to the waterline by the troops of Napoleon when they invaded the city, or when they moved into the city in 1797, after the Venetian Republic had voted itself out of existence. Today, this connection with the sea continues to be celebrated. Of course, one of the joys of visiting Venice, isn't it, is to move around in various ways by water. That might be a shimmering water taxi, a vaporetto, or a gondola ride, or even a traghetto, a ferry across the canal. But the ceremonies and the connections are repeated, such as the historical regatta, which is recalling for modern visitors, but very important for Venetians themselves, their connection with the sea. But this connection is not just on a spiritual level, it's also on a social level, in the sense that Venice becomes a large city, a large medieval city with perhaps 200,000 inhabitants, thanks to the connection with the sea. And it's not just sort of the aristocratic merchants who embody this connection with the sea. We've also got a huge number of foreign nationals, traders and sailors, who've come and have used using Venice as their base, which makes it an extraordinary melting pot for the Middle Ages, a time when people rarely moved beyond their own village or perhaps the local market town, let alone sailed the seas, met people of different languages, of different nationalities and different religions. They all get together in Venice. But that sense of a large society brought together by the sea also exists in the notion of the various social levels or social strata of Venice. And so this painting, which comes from the 18th century, it was painted in order that a grand tourist would have a souvenir of the event. It's kind of the social equivalent of some of those ceremonies that we've been seeing in earlier images. This is the Arsenale workers, the Castellani, because they come from Castello, the region of the city where the Arsenal is located, and the Nicolotti, who are the fishermen. So the two lowest levels, the working classes of Venice, both connected to the sea, fishermen and shipbuilders. This ritual is the everyday man, the everyday person's sort of presence in the Venetian society. This is not a fine procession or a regatta. This is something which is called the Battle of the Fists, and it was held on a bridge, which you can see there in the middle, with hundreds of people on it. And what would happen is a representative of the Nicolotti, of the fishermen, would come up on one side, and a representative of the Castellani, the Arsenal workers, would come up on the other side. And the rules were pretty simple. You stood there and you fought, and you tried to push the member of the other team into the canal, and whoever had the most number of players surviving, I should say, dry at the end of the day was the winner. So this little competition took place in 4 places around the city, and only one of the ones was sort of a free-for-all, such as this. The others were a little more regulated, but this was the spectacular one. So this sort of social connection with the sea, also important. Of course, the sea also forms society, and the connection with the sea through the huge number of people that were employed in industries associated. They might have been the sailors that I mentioned, they might have been the merchants who depended on the movement of goods, but they were often the people who actually worked on the boats themselves. Now, moving around the city today, you still see some evidence. There's only 3 of them left. I think 100 years ago, there might have been 50 of them left, these small, privately owned boatyards. And this was the origin of the shipping industry in Venice. Today, of course, they're engaged largely, as we can see in this one, which is the San Trovaso Squero or shipyard, private shipyard. Their main occupation is the construction and maintenance of gondolas. But back in the day, they produced all manner of ships, all manner of boats, the lagoon boats, but also the larger boats that traveled around the Mediterranean. So here from the 1950s, showing you fully functioning, but with more modern kinds of boats. You can see a couple of motorboats there in the lagoon. This is the Squero of Sant'Iseppo, which sadly doesn't exist with us any day. So early on in the first centuries, then shipping and shipbuilding was undertaken privately. The huge shift, and one of the important reasons for Venice's eventual domination of the Mediterranean, comes with the organization of shipping by the state. It's yet another example of how the Venetian state actively involves itself with trade and organizes trade. It does this through the justice system, through financial laws, through the organization of shipping convoys, but most importantly, through the rigid control of the construction and the centralization of construction of boats through the Arsenale, which is built initially in the 12th century, but really expands in the 13th and the 14th century to the form that we see it today, and continues operations right through until the end of World War I, until 1919. And it's only at the end of World War I that the Venetians understand that ships have got so big that they can no longer be constructed in the Arsenale itself. So that's nearly 800 years, as far as we know, of this sort of centralized shipbuilding. This is the classic view of the Arsenale gate that we're looking at, and up until the 19th century, this was the only entrance into and out of the Arsenale, which was a military place. It still is a military station. It was guarded by high walls that you can see, and this canal, which originally had a drawbridge across it, was the way through which the completed ships, largely galleys of the Venetian Republic, would exit. Today there you can see the ceremonial gate to the left, which is the entrance to the naval base that's there today. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, perhaps if you're coming to the Biennale or the Venice Boat Show, you'll be able to walk around at least some of the massive spaces which were used. This was such a remarkable establishment. It was far and away the largest industrial plant in Europe at the time, and centuries and centuries before Henry Ford developed his famous model of production, the Arsenale in Venice operated as a production line with highly specialized labor. This was completely different to other kinds of trades which were run through an apprenticeship system, other trades in Europe and indeed within Venice. It was supervised by the state. They were employees of the state. They made sure that there were the resources there and the know-how for making ships in good times and bad, so that the Venetians could quickly scale up when the opportunity arose or when warfare threatened. And beginning our investigation, I'm going to give you a little bit of poetry, because the famous Italian poet Dante Alighieri, who had been forced to flee his native Florence and traveled throughout northern Italy, visits Venice in the year 1310 and visits the Arsenale, and he is amazed by the production line process. And so in describing hell, Inferno, and one of the levels of Inferno, he talks about how corrupt officials are punished by being boiled alive in pitch. And he's reminded of the pitch and the pots of pitch that he saw, which are used to cork or seal the ships in the Venetian Arsenale. But rather than describing the punishment, there's a little digression for these 9 lines of the Divine Comedy as Dante marvels and records the production line process, the different workers doing different things. As in the Arsenale of the Venetians, boils in the winter the tenacious pitch, smear their unsound vessels over again. For sail they cannot, that is, it's the winter months, and instead thereof one makes his vessel new, and one recorks the ribs of that which many a voyage has made. One hammers at the prow, one at the stern, this one makes the oars, and that one the cordage twists, another mends the mainsail and the mizzen, and so on and so forth. So we're getting a poetic description of a production line. Now, this was such a marvel and continues to be so over the centuries that we have numerous visual records of it, and we can see the structure. So this is an 18th century diagram, and you can see, if you look down to the left-hand side, the channel and the drawbridge, which I mentioned. And if you notice and put your eyes around the outside, you'll notice straight away that there's no other entrance to the sea there. But you can see there the different stages of production. So looking down the bottom there to start off with, can you see those very long spaces, particularly lying right along the bottom. This is the area that you'll walk through if you visit the Biennale of Art today. This is the rope making area, the corderia, and of course it's a very, very long pavilion because this is where the cords were made. But the shipbuilding actually begins up the top in that uppermost right-hand side basin. You can see that there are 3 or 4 different basins around there, and that begins with the hulls, which are made in their individual workshops. And then once the hull is completed, the ships are then sailed around the various workshops there. So this is you can see now in this schematic area. So the hull making up the top that's there in that area. The hulls are then caulked with the pitch that Dante describes. They then go onto the spar area, which uses a different type of timber for the masts. Weapons, of course, were an important part, and so there were foundries within the Arsenale, which made the cannon, which are then loaded and bolted onto the ships. The ropes are then taken from the corderie and open the anchors and the oars for the galleys. Last of all, the sails, and there's even a bakery to supply the ship before it sails out to sea. So imagine 10,000 workers, specialized to the extent that there were guilds of oar makers, guilds of rope makers, guilds of weapon makers, etc., of caulkers and things like that. Dozens and dozens of people skilled in these areas. Their families were looked after. They had retirement homes. They had a state salary. It was a remarkable industry. We have lots of different things. So, for example, lots of different pieces of evidence, I should say, to show us what was going on. One of the most interesting you'll find in the Correa Museum, which is the city museum, and these are these banners or standards, if you like, of the different guilds. So at different points in the calendar, the Venetian social calendar, the guildsmen had feast days. They were able to parade through the city, or perhaps around St. Mark's Square, and so they needed these banners at the front of them. They show the protection, as you can see, of the Virgin Mary and various other saints. They show the noble crests of the noblemen who are the gastaldo, or the supervisors of the guild on behalf of the state. And then down below they show the activity. Now these are the marangoni, or the ship's carpenters, the ship's hull carpenters, and you can see them there soaring and working at their specialized crafts. Another representation we see here, and this is a bit like the description we get from Dante. This is from a woodcut from the year 1500 of the city, and I've focused in on just a tiny corner so that you can see caulking, or the calafati, who are the caulkers, plying their craft. The ship are careened, that is, they're put aground at low tide, and then the ships are turned over or leant over using ropes, and during the low tide they're recaulked on the outside, and of course later on, and this stops the leaks in the ship. So the various guilds and the various industries and specialization around the Arsenale. A second aspect of Venetian shipping, extremely important to understand, is the way that Venetians technologically developed, not just through the building of ships, but also things such as map making and navigation. That was important. And as always, the Venetians displayed their incredible ability to see ideas that had been developed elsewhere and to commercialize them, or to create commercial advantage by developing them for shipping and for various other industries within Venice. So advanced navigation and charting. So we're looking here at an astrolabe. Now this was a way of measuring the angle between stars and the horizon according to different places at different times of year, which had been developed in the Arab world and found their way to the sea. So you can see sort of a simple use of the astrolabe to use measure the height of a building. This is from an Arabic illustration, but can you see that this can also be used to measure the sun, the angle of the sun, or in celestial navigation, the angle of the stars. So working out that angle and the position of those allowed you to navigate, use celestial navigation. And this is what later becomes sextants and octants and other sort of navigational instruments. At the same time, they're using compass measurements and port records to to create more and more accurate charts. And these allow the development, they allow the expansion of the shipping season from its initial 6 months to 9 months, and then eventually for the trading cycles to work the whole year. As well as this, in actual shipbuilding, the Venetians start off with a Byzantine idea, the trireme galley, which was a kind of a ship which existed. Well, the ancient Romans had a variety of it, but the Byzantines really developed this as a warship. The Venetians are producing this in their Arsenale, but they're also technologically developing them and expanding them. So I've got a few. So the knowledge of the astrolabe and how to use it for celestial navigation comes to Europe from the Middle East, and it's because of Venice's extensive trade connections with the East that it's going to get this knowledge first and these charts, and is able to adapt the astrolabe. They're geographically specific for different parts of the Mediterranean through which Venice trades. Of course, it's got the scholars and the contact with the East to be able to translate, of course, the Arabic script here and the language here to be able to use these ideas. Map making with compasses, which come into the Mediterranean in about the 12th century, get used to measure the position, the geographic position of various landmarks. Those are recorded in ships' logs, and those logs and the different measurements are then converted visually into Portolan maps, as they're called, which are based on the port books, hence the title, Portolan books, which become the very early maps, which are used, are very, very useful. And you can see here an initial representation through these recordings. If you can make up there on the upper left-hand side the outline of the Italian peninsula, you can see that this is a Portolan map of the Mediterranean. So the Venetians are playing a key role in that. And they're using the map making not just sort of for navigation purposes, but also as a kind of an encyclopedic summary of the world as it's known to the Venetian merchants. So this remarkable map is produced on the island of San Michele, where today the cemetery of Venice is located, or the historic cemetery of Venice is located, and it's a map that's put together in the 15th century in secret. It's a commercial product by Fra Mauro for the King of Portugal, who wants to get access to what Venice knows about the world. So it's a decorative map, but what it shows you, if you look at the right, it's upside down, you can see Western Europe. But can you see, if you switch that upside down, you've got a representation of the known world, which goes as far as Cathay, as China, Taiwan, Indochina, India, the Middle East, and of course Scandinavia and Russia. It's a remarkable document, very much worth visiting the Korea Museum just to see. And what you can't see on this map in the script, there's knowledge and information about all of the different peoples who live in all of those different places, as well as the mountains and lakes and natural resources that can be found in those parts of the world. So this is a monumental and remarkably impressive summa, or summary, of Venetian geographical knowledge that's been building up over those times. But of course, it's the ships themselves and the boats themselves which provide such a delightful record of Venice's connection with the sea. And I thought I'd start with some modern images. We'll look firstly at the lagoon boats and have a look at some of those, and I've used modern photos for some of them before we have a look at some of the historic boats, which you should know about because they're the basis of Venice as well. So this is a batea buranea. So this was a kind of boat which typically went across the island towards Burano, so hence its name. And as you can see, many of these boats are still used today, built today. They look very beautiful. They're beautifully maintained, and they're used for very often Sunday recreation, voga veneta, or Venetian rowing. And you can see those wonderfully elegant and complicated rowlocks that are used on both gondolas, but these kinds of boats for navigating. A topo, which means a mouse, is a small lantine sailed boat. They'll often have a motor as well with an external rudder, and they go back, we see those in illustrations going right back to the 11th and 12th century, that particular form. The motor version of it, a barge, is a mototopo, and it tells us, and that's the most common thing for moving goods around the city. This might be sort of mineral water that you can see, or hotel laundry, or if you're getting furniture delivered, it's probably, or a fridge or something like that, it's probably going to come on a barge like this one here. And then a Caorlina, named after the town of Caorle on the mainland, on the edge of the lagoon, a longer kind of rowing boat, very popular for Voga Veneta, so a modern crew of 6 people in that distinctive standing up rowing style that you can see. A cofano, or a coffin, is a sleek motorboat, and it forms the basis, of course, of the motoscafo, or the water taxi, which you might have been lucky enough to catch at some point around. A sandalo, different from a gondola. It looks like a gondola, but it's a single-ended boat, a little bit longer, and is used as a basic kind of road transportation around the lagoon. A larger form, you might have looked at this and thought it was a gondola. I'm really beginning to split hairs there. This is a barqueta, a masoque. It's typically rowed by 2 oarsmen. It's a little larger than a gondola, and it's the kind of boat that's used as the traghetto, or the ferry boat that takes you across various points of the lagoon, and is a form of public transport that you can get for just €2. It's the cheapest trip across the canal that you can get. And then finally, of course, I couldn't go through this catalogue of different kinds of ships without looking at the gondola, which is the renowned, but I hope you understand now, not the only form of lagoon transportation that which the Venetians have developed. And so let's look now at some of the ocean-going boats, and particularly the galleys, which the Venetians were famous for. So as you can see, very similar to the photograph of the modern boat that I showed you, this was a cog, which was a small cargo ship which could be used around the lagoon, the rivers, and specifically the Mediterranean. 2 lantine sails, they'd come from North Africa, that particular style, and a large fat boat that could hold a small cargo of precious goods in it. So that's one of the earliest forms that we know about before the Venetians take over and the galleys. So you get many different things, such as the Venetian galley, or the galera, which could be from 100 to 300 tons, and could carry more cargo and heavier cargo as well as people. Now, this particular ship would accompany some of the sort of the slower sailing ships which contained a lot of the goods. They weren't rowed the entire distance across the Mediterranean, and you can see, in fact, that this has got 2 very large lantine sails. So most of the time, in fact, these ships sailed along with the other members of the convoy. However, when it came time to defend or attack the convoy, this is when the oars take on a new role. So these were numbered and considered by the number of oarsmen who sat at each of the bench. So a trireme galley, which the Venetians develop, is nothing other than a sailing boat where there are 3 oarsmen with these incredibly long oars. I have to tell you, 6 or 7 meters long, incredibly heavy, which were rowed by the sailors. And these sailors also doubled as soldiers, so that when the ship or the land was reached that was being attacked or defended, the oarsmen would get out their swords. There were cannons sometimes located on these as well, and would begin their attacking. So here's an illustration of a Venetian trireme, and you can see very clearly here the 3 oars that are on each of the benches there, and the Venetian standard, but being flown there, the winged line of St. Mark's, the lookout posts, but also the lantine sails, which were used for most of the time during voyages. Later on, as we developed, we get the great galleys, or the galleasses, or the galleons. So ONE in Italian just means larger. So it's an augmentative suffix. So a galleon, which we know probably from Spain and Spanish trips across the Atlantic, is simply a large galley. And so this etching from 1484, it's hard to get people spent their time sailing the oceans, not drawing pictures of it. So this is one of the few pictures of a great galley, one of the Venetian great galleys shown here approaching the port of Rhodes in 1484. And you can see again, one very large or two lanterne sails, oarsmen. Of course, we're approaching the port, so we've got oarsmen and we've got, I think, a pilot rowing the ship in there at the front and guiding it in. So whilst other galleys sit outside the port there. So this is as large as the gate. And then as we get towards the end of the period of Venetian domination, we get what was a very large battleship, of kind of a floating fortress ship, and this was a galleass. So you can imagine in battles such as the Battle of Lepanto in 1571, dozens and dozens of the small galleys, punctuated by 5 or 6 of these very large ships, which were able to carry on them larger cannon than the small galleys, and are used as perhaps staying a little bit behind the battle lines. So a much more complex and much more dominating kind of battleship. Eventually, by the time we get to the 1500s, it's the Spanish which take the baton of shipbuilding away from the Venetians, and the later innovations are the Spanish galleons. But for hundreds of years, the innovation has been underway with the Venetians. And so we get representations of ships and the sea all over the place. One of the most famous and the most beautiful and most important is another commercial work, in the sense that it was created in order to make money. And this is by the Venetian artist and printmaker Jacopo dei Barbari. And this is his magnificent aerial view of Venice, not a bird's eye view, but not from straight above view. It's created and printed onto 6 pair wood blocks. It took him years to produce. It's such an accurate representation of the city that you can still navigate around the city of them. He made 40 versions of it, which he sold to various places in Europe, various courts in Europe, and therefore got his money back with this particular project. But we're fortunate that one of the versions of this, as well as the original wood blocks, are housed in the Correa Museum as well. That's the same museum, by the way, that had that beautiful map by Fra Mauro. So if you are interested in ships and the sea, you should definitely make your way to the Correa Museum to see these 2 important artifacts, as well as many others. Moving around the Venetian world, apart from the city at Venice itself, it's remarkable how, particularly in the Greek islands, remnants of the Venetian world survive. So Venice didn't just have its one arsenal in the city of Venice itself. It created arsenals all over, and moreover, it had standardized parts: sails, ropes, spars, blocks and tackle, anchors, even the cannons and other things, and they were stationed through. So unlike other individual traders, if a Venetian ship broke down, it could replace the parts very quickly in one of the various arsenals and get on with its journey. So this is what is left of one that was on the island of Corfu and Heraklion in Crete. If you go down to the harbour, and you can see a kind of an illustration from the time there showing the Venetian shipyards, many of which still survive to this day. So a little rundown there of Venice and shipping in the sea, how shipping is connected and the sea is connected on those sort of spiritual and social levels, but then looking at the Arsenale and that incredible production line of the Arsenale, and then a little catalogue of some of the different ships. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and next time that you're looking down the Grand Canal or looking towards the lagoon, you can perhaps identify some of those lagoon boats. Thank you very much.